Picture the person you were 10 years ago, the things they were afraid of, the things they were certain about, the people they thought would be in their life forever. Now ask yourself, did that person choose to become you, or did they just become you, quietly, without really noticing? Because here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. The person you'll be in 10 years is already taking shape, right now, today, in decisions so small you won't even remember making them, in patterns so familiar they feel like personality, in a version of yourself that's already forming, whether you're paying attention or not. And the most unsettling part, you've done almost nothing to design that person. There's a concept in psychology called personality crystallization. It sounds technical, it's actually terrifying. The idea is this: somewhere between your mid-20s and early 30s, your personality, the way you respond to stress, the way you love people, the way you handle failure, the stories you tell yourself at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep, it stops being fluid. It starts to set, like concrete that's been slowly hardening for years, and one day you press your hand into it and it doesn't leave a mark anymore. The person you are right now is either still wet or already starting to harden. And most people don't notice until it's done. But here's where it gets stranger, because this isn't just philosophy. This isn't just some abstract psychological theory. There's a study, a real one, that followed the same group of people for over 50 years, from teenagers to old age. And what they found quietly reordered everything we think we understand about change, identity, and the future self we all assume we're building toward. The study began in Scotland in the 1950s. Researchers took a group of 14-year-olds and had their teachers rate them on 6 personality traits: curiosity, confidence, conscientiousness, originality, the desire to learn, dependability. Then they left them alone for 63 years. In 2012, they tracked down the survivors and measured the same traits again. They expected to find at least some thread connecting the teenager to the old person, some recognizable echo of who they'd been. They found almost nothing. The correlation between the personality of a 14-year-old and the personality of that same person at 77 was so weak, it was barely statistically meaningful. They were, for all practical purposes, different people, which should be comforting, right? We can change. We're not locked in. But then something strange happened. When they looked at shorter time windows, decade by decade, the picture changed completely. Your personality at 25 predicts your personality at 35 with frightening accuracy. 35 to 45, same thing. The direction you're moving in right now is far more predictable than you want to believe. You're not locked in forever, but you might be locked in for the next 10 years without even knowing. Here's the part that keeps me up at night. Psychologists have a name for the gap between who we think we'll become and who we actually become. They call it the end of history illusion. It works like this. Every person on Earth at every age can look backward and clearly see how much they've changed. The relationships that shaped them, the failures that reordered their priorities, the moments that broke something open. But when those same people look forward, they dramatically underestimate how much change is still coming. They think they've done most of their changing. They think the person they are today is basically the finished version. A 20-year-old thinks this. A 40-year-old thinks this. A 60-year-old thinks this. Everyone at every stage of life is quietly convinced they've finally arrived at themselves. And everyone is wrong. But here's where it becomes something darker than just being wrong about the future. Because the end of history illusion doesn't just make you bad at predicting change, it makes you stop trying to cause it. Think about your daily life right now. Not the big dramatic version of it, not the goals and the dreams and the person you're planning to become, the actual texture of Tuesday, what you do in the first 30 minutes after waking up, who you talk to, what you consume, what you avoid. What you tell yourself is temporary, because your brain doesn't experience your life as a story. It experiences it as a pattern. And patterns, repeated enough times, stop being choices and start being identity. The person who says, "I'll start being more disciplined soon," their brain is already filing undisciplined under who I am, not what I'm doing. The person who keeps choosing the comfortable option, their nervous system is learning that comfort is the goal. The person who avoids the conversation, skips the difficult thing, stays in the situation they've outgrown, they are not waiting to change. They are changing right now. Just not in the direction they'd choose if they were paying attention. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. The future version of you isn't waiting somewhere down the road. They're being assembled in real time, from the materials you're handing over every single day. But stop, because I don't want this to feel like an attack. I want it to feel like a mirror, because the real question isn't whether your future is being shaped without your conscious input. It obviously is. The real question is, are you one of the rare people who decides to notice that? There's a concept that the philosopher William James wrote about in 1890 that somehow still hasn't made it into the mainstream conversation about self-improvement. He said that by the age of 30, character has set like plaster and will never soften again. Now, modern psychology thinks he was slightly too harsh, but only slightly. What James was pointing at wasn't that change becomes impossible, it's that change becomes expensive. It costs more effort, more discomfort, more sustained intention than most people are willing to spend, because the brain genuinely prefers the path it already knows. And so most people don't change in their 30s or their 40s, not because they can't, because Tuesday happened, and then Wednesday. And the version of themselves they were going to become quietly stops being a plan and starts being a regret. Here's the thought I keep returning to. There's a version of you, 10 years from now, who made slightly different choices starting today. Not dramatic ones, not a total reinvention, just slightly different. They read a little more. They had the uncomfortable conversation instead of postponing it. They spent their mornings differently. They let go of the story that was keeping them comfortable but small. That person has a different relationship, a different sense of themselves, a different quality of attention when they walk into a room. They didn't become someone unrecognizable. They just became a fuller version of the person you already are. And there's another version of you 10 years from now who did none of that, who kept meaning to, who had the insight, maybe even watched this video, felt the weight of it, and then went back to Tuesday. Both of those people are being built right now from identical materials. The disturbing thing about the future isn't that it's uncertain. It's that in some very specific, very measurable ways, it isn't. The patterns you're living inside right now are already writing the story. The question is whether you're one of the rare people who decides to read the draft before it's finished. Because you can. Change is harder after a certain point, yes. But the people who do change really change, not just in their behavior, but in who they fundamentally are. Almost always share one thing in common. They stopped treating their future self as someone who would figure it out later. They started treating them as someone who needed help right now. 10 years will pass. They always do, quietly, faster than you expect, in the exact same way that the last 10 years passed. Full of Tuesdays that felt like nothing, until you looked back and realized they were everything. The only real question is whether the person standing at the end of that decade will look back and recognize the moment things started to shift, or wonder why they never did. That moment could be right now. If you let it,